This is The Baseline, discussing the hot button topics of the NBA.
Welcome, everybody. You're tuned to The Baseline. Kyle Warren Shaw discussing the hot button topics of the NBA. Great show on tap, man. We got to bring them out. We had great guests last week. We have great guests this week, man. We're going to keep it rolling. Let me go ahead and put that red carpet out to my right-hand man, 50 grand, www.shawsports.net, Big Kahuna PNC, my brother from another mother, Mr. Warren Shaw, repping out of Fort Lauderdale, Florida. Holla back at me, Mr. Shaw. Are we ready to start putting in some hoops redemption?
It's always a great time, for the hoops redeeming, bruh. And I think this week, we're continuing to bring the great content that our show continues to do. Rick Bartholomew coming on earlier in the week, discuss Basketball Love Story, that great project along with ESPN, and working alongside Jackie Mack and Mr. Clores as well, too. And now we have an amazing guest, Sports Illustrated, coming on again to talk about hoops redemption, our coveted segment that we haven't done in a while. But it's great to bring it back. And again, they said to get this type of help to assist us with this, it's just, it can't get any better than that, man. So I know our fans and listeners are going to enjoy this one, man. Sit back, relax, and take them on into it, my dude.
Yeah, man. We have one of the great insiders and great writers that covers the NBA, Ben Golliver from Sports Illustrated. He'll be hopping on board with us in a few moments as we break down our main segment. Tonight is going to be Hoops Redemption. Those players that are out there that we've been watching over the last few seasons. They've been kind of like they've been in a rut, man. They've been in a rut, and this could be a turnaround season or this could be a turnabout season for them. We don't know, but hopefully our man Ben will help us figure it out. So strap on with us, man. We're about to get in some people, and as our man Ben says, man, we might have to put some bodies in the ground before this is all over with. Once again, get at my man Shaw at Shaw Sports NBA or get at me at GameFace Lee. The show's Twitter handle at NBA Baseline. We're available on all the major platforms. So you know where to find us and you know how to get at us. We always encourage you to download the platform, allow us to be your go-to resource discussing all things happening in the association. Also available on Dash Radio exclusively with Nothing But Net Radio Network. So be sure to capture the essence of basketball 24/7. Get Nothing But Net, and you can catch the Baseline NBA podcast Tuesdays at 9 a.m. You know how we do, and you know how we roll. It's time now for the breakdown.
Time to break it
down.
down.
You down to the bone gristle.
Time now for the breakdown. Kyle Warren Shaw of the Baseline NBA podcast. This week, we have a special guest on board with us to help us highlight hoop redemption. It's been a while since Sean and I actually kind of brought this out of the tombstone. But we felt that rather than waiting until we get towards, the midway point of the season or maybe even in the off season, after seeing the hype and the excitement of the how the NBA season has started, we felt it was only right that this time around we collaborate with one of the best minds that are out there that is covering the NBA. He's been writing for Sports Illustrated for some time. He is Ben Golliver. Ben, thank you for hopping on board with us this week to talk hoops redemption, man.
Hey, it's my pleasure. I guess that makes me the grave digger, right? We're pulling careers straight out of the cemetery. We're trying to get them back onto the hardwood, and I'm glad to help.
Hey, man, I was about to break out that theme music for you. You know what I'm saying? And get Paul Bearer to, to bring the urn out. But we might start off light. People might not understand, what perspective you're coming from. Before we get into our main topic of conversation, Ben, I first want to get your thoughts about the overall landscape. The first, week and a half or so about the NBA season, just from your perspective, the ups and downs. What is it that you're really hyped over? What was it that you've kind of felt a little disappointed about so far from what you've seen this season?
I think the biggest story in the entire league right now is style of play. I mean, scoring is way up, pace is up. Lots of foul calls. With the point of emphasis in terms of freedom of movement. It almost feels like we're in the juice ball era of the NBA where, it's not uncommon to see teams get 130 points. I mean, sometimes it's 140 points. I was at the Lakers game last night. It was 143 to 142. Some of the stat lines have just been completely eye-popping, whether it's Anthony Davis or Giannis. And what we're really seeing is the trickle-down effect from the Warriors about 2 or 3 years ago, where it's like pace and space. You only have pretty much one traditional big man in your rotation. And now we're seeing basically every team around the league, with very few exceptions, adopting that style of play. And it's just been nuts to see some of these, these score lines. New Orleans the other night put up 149 points in a regulation game. I mean, that is just crazy. You rarely see that. And it's happening consistently too. And I think what we're going to see this season, if it continues, it will be the highest scoring year of the 3-point era, going back to 1980. And we have seen kind of a gradual increase over the last 5 seasons, but this year it's really spiking. And it seems like with the rule changes, it's almost equivalent to 10 or 15 years ago where they said hand checking was no longer legal. I mean, now you're basically taking away hand checking off the ball. It's making for a wide open game, a really fun game. And I think, ultimately it's kind of less predictable, because if any team can score 120 points on a given night because they're playing a modern style of play, it winds up giving hope to basically everybody.
So I need to jump in and ask a quick question as a follow-up there, Ben. Is what does your gut tell you as far as the league? I mean, the league has gone through so many different iterations of sometimes where they like when the pace is like this and they like the defense, and then that kind of went away, and now we're in the era that we're in right now. If it stays at this kind of ridiculous pace right now, will the league, or owners or somebody come and say, "Oh man, it's too much. We got to change the rules again to maybe try to bring scoring down a little bit"? Because what's your initial thoughts on that potentially?
No, it's a great question. But remember, during the juice ball era for baseball, the owners were not trying to kill the golden goose, right? They were trying to milk it for years, and they were looking the other way when it came to the steroids and all that. It's like anytime you can get the scoring up, it gets fans excited to go attend the games in person. It gets people buying jerseys. It gets everybody bought in. And I think, imagine being for example, like the Orlando Magic from a couple years ago, where they couldn't even score a point. Versus a team like the Sacramento Kings this year, where they're going to give up 130 basically every game, but at least they can put points on the scoreboard, and at least they can be an entertaining show. It's like it's better to be entertaining than it is to be bad. I think that's sort of, if you're going to be bad, you might as well be fun to watch. I think that's sort of the mantra right now, and so I can see the league wanting to just ride this for a few years, even if some of the stats start to look crazy, and even if the triple doubles stack up and the 50-point games stack up, I think the NBA is just sort of all about this. But to me as a purist, I do think at some point it could become too much, right? I mean, do you really want to watch a team score 200 points? I mean, wouldn't you want to see some level of defense? We don't want to tilt things too far towards favoring the offense, but I think it's such a new development, and it's still kind of unfolding, and probably unfolding more than the league anticipated, this sharp jump, that I wouldn't expect any kind of corrective actions here for, at least a couple seasons.
Well, look, I find it remarkable that teams who struggle to score points, teams like the Memphis Grizzlies, teams like the Indiana Pacers, and even the Sacramento Kings, that have struggled to score the basketball, somehow are cracking the 100-point mark like it's nothing. And that has to tell you something. I am real quick, and I don't want us to veer way too off of the topic here, because it is about hoops redemption. But I am curious from your perspective, and given what you just said, Ben. So if this was the case, how important will it be for someone to crack the Da Vinci Code of offense if all of these teams are playing in the way that they're playing? I mean, doesn't it now more highlight that if there is that one head coach that has figured out a way to stop these type of offenses, that he would be like one of the most sought after type head coaches, or the coaching staff, so to speak, with the type of personnel that's necessary in order to compete, if we're continuing to trend this direction?
For sure, but what we've seen these last couple of years in the playoffs is nobody's figured it out. I mean, the Warriors go 4-4-4-1, half the time through these series, and in most of the games they're winning by an average of double digits in points. So it's not like there's some mastermind who's the next Tom Thibodeau who sort of figured them out. I think what it really does is it puts a premium on players like the Draymond Greens of the world, guys who can be elite, versatile defenders, but also be, positive offensive contributors. Those guys are only going to get more valuable, because, the very best defensive guys, whether it's, like a Rudy Gobert or even a Joel Embiid, as we get into the playoffs, we'll see if those guys can really stay on the court against the high-powered offenses, or if they struggle in those types of situations, because it's just getting so much harder to control the tempo when the game gets faster and faster and the skill players have more and more space to sort of operate in. And, that's why you see, a rise in the value of a player like a PJ Tucker for Houston with the versatility and being able to play up a position or two and still rebound the basketball. Those guys who were already sort of in vogue here the last couple of seasons, those guys are now going to really be worth their weight in gold if these trends continue.
Well, and I think that's a great way to maybe even to lead into this a little bit, because I look at it and say, well, at what point does it really become Super League watered down, so to speak? Players who aren't maybe all that great, but they're getting inflated numbers because of the pace of the league. And then they're trying to be going out after these contracts, so to speak. It's like, well, hey, I averaged a double and I did X, Y, and Z, and here are my stats. Do general managers, savvy general managers, when it looks like, all right, well, that's the pace we're in right now. If this was 5 years ago, you'd be 8-5. And there's no way we're going to go ahead and give you these dollars. So I want to start with a guy who's struggled tremendously in his first destination when it comes to hoops, any hoops redemption whatsoever. And I know it's kind of a steep drop off of the kind of the great things we've been talking about here right now. But Alex Len gets a new opportunity from Phoenix, now goes to Atlanta, starting because Dwayne Dedmon is injured, and we'll see if that ends up being a position battle of some sort, one way or the other. But what are your thoughts on Alex Len? Can he receive any type of hoops redemption here at the Atlanta Hawks, based on their style of play and their personnel on the roster?
I mean, to me, he's a draft bust, right? And so he did not live up to his draft position or what they had hoped for.
You're already digging the grave right now, Ben. You're digging it up right now.
Yeah, well, I'll just keep it real. I mean, I'm not going to beat around the bush. He had a rough time in Phoenix, right? But I think the benefit of changing teams, like you've mentioned, is that it just decreases all of the expectations, right? Nobody expects you to be anything now because the guys who drafted you sort of gave up on you, right? So now all they're saying is, look, can you play rotation minutes for us? And then can you sort of be like, maybe in a best case scenario, you're the spot starter, and before they get towards smaller lineups so that they're eventually going to play once this team is any good. I don't think that's out of the question for him, but I've never viewed him as the most skilled player. Obviously, getting up and down the court's pretty tricky for him. Covering ground and space defensively. Like, I think those are things physically he's never really going to be able to do. But I do think that, like, if you could set picks for Trae Young, you're going to have a job in the NBA, right? So can you go out and set hard picks and roll to the hoop? That's why I think a guy like John Collins for them is going to be feasting, consistently here over the next couple of years, just because Trae Young's ability to be a maestro in the pick and roll. And I think, for a center, like, that's how he should be viewing himself, right? More, I don't know if I want to call him like a Robin Lopez type, but that kind of a guy where all you are is just, dirty work, screen setting, trying to, block out guys so your teammates can get rebounds, and then try not to get in the way. I mean, to me, that would be a successful career for him. What about you guys?
Well, my take on it real quick is, again, I'm not too sure about his overall personality and where he stands in that, and was he really a hard worker in Phoenix despite all the injuries that he kind of went and had when he was in that system, so to speak. Multiple coaches on that team as well too, and whether or not he was utilized in the right way. I think I agree with exactly what you're saying. Is like, if he puts his mind in the right space, understand, okay, here's what my role could potentially be. And every big right now, coming out of training camp is now they're shooting corner threes, and that dance isn't for everybody. But Len is on board with that as well right now as well too. But it's will be interesting to see how Pierce uses him in Atlanta, to see if he can really truly receive hoops redemption. Cal, what are your thoughts?
Well, my thought is that I think Alex Len is a serviceable player. He had numerous opportunities really to kind of shine in his role in Phoenix, and even to more so to the point when they were still trying to figure out where the offense was going to flow through. I think they had given him a few opportunities for him to be the centerpiece. Now, it's very clear. The Atlanta Hawks, if they're going to trade to get a Trae Young is their Steph Curry. Trae Young is the focal point of the offense. If you're Alex Len, the only way that you're going to be viable for that basketball team is you got to do right by Trae Young. And ultimately, you have to prove that Trae Young can't do it by himself. Now, they could be a decent tandem. The kid's only 25 years old. The problem is can he execute well enough to stay on the court and at the same time improve on certain elements to his game that will be an attribute for what his position represents? I'm a little skeptical about that. But if you're going to do that, do it on the poorest of poor basketball teams possible. You can't afford to do it playing with teams that are, playoff that are borderline playoff bound or anything like that. You have to basically do it where nobody's paying attention to what you're doing. And ultimately, if the numbers, fare well for him, he's going to wind up being on that basketball court because they look at the upside. But he's got to do it favorably to help, to your point, Ben, to what Trae Young would love to see. Now, speaking of bigs, it's interesting because I want to peel off on that when we talk about a guy like Alex Len. I had put one of my peoples for Hoops Redemption is a guy like Miles Turner. And we're talking about this given the fact that what happened last year and bringing Victor Oladipo, the mindset was that Miles Turner was supposed to be the man. The team would essentially at some point run through Miles Turner, and it winds up being that Victor Oladipo has taken over this team. I feel like now the emphasis is on whether or not Miles Turner can live up to the hype that he brandished himself coming in as a rookie, because he's being overshadowed by the play of Victor Oladipo. And I feel like there's a level of hoops redemption that needs to be there, especially if this is a basketball team that has a lot of momentum going into the fact that they should be winning the Central Division. Where do you see Miles Turner in this fold, Ben?
Yeah, I mean, Indiana definitely is trying to take a team approach to everything, right? So, of course, Oladipo is the leader, but they're trying to do is sort of by committee and get contributions from solid guys at all five spots, whether it's like a Collison or Sabonis, chips in, Bogdanovich. I mean, they've got a pretty interesting roster and a really good culture. I mean, guys like Kevin Pritchard and Nate McMillan. I mean, going back to their time in Portland, I used to live up in Portland and watch those guys pretty closely. They know how to construct a locker room and a team environment to make sure everybody succeeds and feels like they're contributing. So it's not that prototypical situation where it's like, okay, we drafted you in the lottery, now you're going to be our savior. That's not really the challenge for him. I think it's more about, gradually, making marginal improvements, becoming a more complete offensive player, becoming a more reliable rim protector. Now, this is a guy who gets a lot of, shots, block shots, but is he really a reliable play-to-play backline defender, captain of your defense? I'm not sure he's gotten there yet. But the one thing we know about Miles Turner, the physical tools are there. I mean, the work he put into his body over the summer was very well cataloged. He's got the right combination of length, quickness, end-to-end speed, mobility. Like he pencils out to be a really interesting player. I think my big concern is, does he wind up being one of these guys who's just a tease, right? Like you always expect him to be about 10% better than he actually is. And maybe he doesn't really have a star's future, and maybe he just winds up being a pretty good player. I mean, I think that would be my concern with a player like Miles Turner. But, I think he's already, a solid rotation guy who, has a fairly bright future.
Yeah, and my thoughts are, it's just, he's a great kid, and really kind of come a long way in terms of just understanding the NBA a little bit, but hasn't scratched the roof of his overall potential. And I do feel the same thing that you do, Ben. Is like, again, what's going to happen? Yeah, now he signs a big deal. And he's consistently getting outplayed by Sabonis, and Nate McMillan has no intention of ever running the two of them out together. I was reading that somewhere. It's just like those analytics just haven't seemed to gel for Indiana all that well. And then Sabonis is going to be up for a deal pretty soon as well. So, that's going to be interesting to see how they kind of keep that roster together, or that tandem together, and what role Turner ends up playing in the Indiana Pacers system moving forward. Next, guys, we want to talk about, and I think we're already kind of seeing some redemption here in the early part of the season. We're going to talk about them kind of in a tandem here, and that's Zach LaVine and Jabari Parker on Chicago Bulls. LaVine coming out, scoring 30 points a game, just really doing it really easily. He got his big deal over the summer. I think there was no way he was actually going to Sacramento at some point. Parker gets a 2-year deal with the team option on the second end of that, as Chicago had some money to spend coming into this year. Of those two guys, I mean, I think, they're both still relatively young, have a ceiling in some ways, not defenders in any way, shape, or form. But do you see them getting to the types of level that they were hyped up to be coming into their rookie years a couple seasons ago?
I mean, maybe in the case of Zach. I mean, to me, the ship has kind of sailed on Jabari in terms of him being an elite prospect. It's not his fault. Two big time knee surgeries have kind of changed who he is as a player. I don't think he's particularly good on offense anymore, or at least he hasn't shown it yet. And then defensively, I hate to call guys his age a lost cause, but I feel like he's a lost cause. In terms of Zach, he has shown more early this season. I think he's shown more overall as a pro. in terms of what his NBA skill is, which is creating offense for himself. I see him kind of a one-trick pony. Like his trick is very good. Like the guy can go out and shoot the basketball and get to his spots and put up 30, like you mentioned, but he's not really a creator for others. Defensively, clear minus, and you have to work around him. I would not trust him. They've had some injury issues at the point guard position. I would not trust him to really run the offense like as an interim solution. I just don't think that would work out very well for your overall team effect. And so I think they're going to need more from Levine this season than I think he's best suited to giving. I think his best role would be as a super sixth man, a guy who plays starter minutes off the bench and just can go in there and fill it up and not really have to think about responsibilities like running an offense and keeping other guys involved. And then that way you could hide his defensive weaknesses a little bit better. But, sorry to be a negative Nancy, but I just don't, I don't see it with Jabari at all. I thought that was a very questionable contract they handed out. It felt kind of like a lazy move from their front office just because he was the hometown guy. And, to me, I'll believe it when I see it with Jabari.
Ben Golliver joining us here on the Baseline NBA podcast, doing his thing for Sports Illustrated, and is definitely doing his thing, helping us here as we give you our segment, Hoops Redemption. Let's push it forward. Now, I have an interesting Hoops Redemption, and follow with me on this one, Ben. I put Kyrie Irving down on this one because when I look at the dynamic of the Boston Celtics, this is a basketball team with very high expectations. This is a team that's really expected to go to the NBA Finals. They should be coming out of the East. At least that's what, most of everybody is what their perception is. One of the things that I've often said, and I think part of this has been complexed by what Terry Rozier was able to do filling in and really taking the reins and helping this basketball team move on without Hayward, without Irving last season, is really put the onus and the spotlight back on Kyrie Irving and why he demanded to leave Cleveland and LeBron James and to come out on his own and be what he thinks he ought to be for any basketball team that wants to be in this position. And in the early outset, we're kind of seeing where the spotlight is going to be on Kyrie Irving if he doesn't produce, if he isn't fourth quarter Kyrie Irving. And I feel like there's a level of hoops redemption there because if he wants to continue to be the Uncle Drew, he wants to be the razzle dazzle, which in essence at times is what the Boston Celtics really need at the end of basketball games, and you're not seeing it. This could actually be a big blow on his image, and really what the perception is him being an elite guard, an elite player, a top 5, top 7 player in the NBA.
No, I think it's a great pick. I mean, among the superstar class of guys, he has a lot to prove this year. One of my favorite little scouting axioms is like the greatest ability is availability, right? And like, what did Kyrie do in the playoffs? He didn't do anything because he wasn't healthy. And ultimately, if you're talking about expectations for the Celtics, him being able to stay on the court is one of their very biggest X factors because yes, they could even make the finals probably without him. But if they're going to fully deliver on what their ceiling as a team is, Kyrie's not only got to be on the court, he's not only got to be that late game guy that you're mentioning, but he's got to do it every single night for like 8 months straight. And that's been a problem for him throughout his career going back to Duke. I mean, he's always had little things here and there, banged up, multiple issues with the knee. And that makes you worried. And, right around the corner, of course, is a gigantic contract commitment that they're going to have to make to him, right? And he's already signaled that he wants to be back. Well, if you're Boston and you're trying to launch this dynasty, which they're clearly trying to do, right? They want to be sort of the successors to Golden State. You can't have a John Wall style contract on your books, going to a guy like Kyrie if he's going to be in and out of the lineup with injuries or missing 30 or 40 games here and there, left and right. That will kill your hopes at having a dynasty. So I do think it's absolutely correct to put Kyrie, in this conversation of guys who have a lot to prove this season and kind of need to pull together that reputation that maybe he really, peaked in 2016 when he hit that finals clinching 3-pointer.
Makes a lot of sense to me, and I'm going to kind of keep it not necessarily in the superstar class, but in a very well respected tier. When we talk about the Memphis Grizzlies and Marc Gasol and Mike Conley, so Conley coming off the injury, Gasol didn't finish the season as well as too, and lots of conversation of whether or not he's a coach killer with the whole Fizdale thing last year, et cetera, et cetera. What are your thoughts on those two guys in the Memphis Grizzlies? They try to bounce back and try to fight to some level of respectability.
Well, I think sometimes you get the short end of the stick when you play in a small market. People don't talk about you, and you don't get as many endorsement deals. But I think Marc Gasol should thank his lucky stars. He plays for the Grizzlies, and nobody nationally cares about the Grizzlies. Can you imagine if what he pulled last year had happened for the Knicks or the Lakers or one of these teams that we talk about all the time, where he definitely got his coach fired, no question about it. And then he laid down for the rest of the season. He's jacking 3-pointers up early in the shot clock from like 30 feet and playing the worst defense of his career and calling out, his management staff or putting a G League team around him. I mean, come on, like he would have gotten crucified in the media. So from that standpoint, he's lucky to be even still, be in that same situation, because I think he would have worked his way out of town in some NBA markets. Obviously, he's beloved there in Memphis because of his ties to the community. Is there any way he can really turn this thing around for himself individually? I don't have a lot of hope there. I do think Conley still has a lot of basketball left in him. The problem there is, as a small point guard, he's missing 15, 20 games a season every year. You just have to write that in. And that really limits their ceiling. If I'm talking just like heart to heart with Grizzlies fans, this is my message to them. Just become a Jaren Jackson Jr. stan. Go buy his jersey, go make a tribute blog, go log on to Instagram and make your little tribute Instagram account, and just get head over and heels in love with this player. He will not let you down. I think he's one of the top 5 guys in the draft who didn't get as much talk, obviously, as a Trae Young or a Luka or an Ayton or even a Bagley. I mean, he's the one guy that didn't really get a lot of love and hype, especially after it got drafted to Memphis. But he could wind up being the best big in that entire class. It would not surprise me at all.
So really quick, Ben, for this situation, when we're talking about Gasol and Conley, what is the best case scenario for, and I'm not talking about this from a player perspective. I'm actually going to talk about this from a team organization perspective. What is the very best that you could hope for that these guys can give you that actually puts the Memphis Grizzlies in a positive light? Like whatever they can contribute this year as a level of unintended hoop redemption, can that be a positive for what Jaren Jackson and the Memphis Grizzlies are going to need moving forward?
Yeah, I'd say their best case scenario this year would be into like that 9 to 10 range in the Western Conference, where you're competitive most nights, you're winning some games at home, so your fans are going home happy. You're seeing, Jaren Jackson in that Rookie of the Year conversation. You're getting, 65 plus games from your main players. And you're sort of like last year's Clippers, where like you're kind of flirting with the playoff bubble, but not really. But at least you're putting out good quality, honest effort, and your fans, kind of rally around that. I think that would be sort of their best case scenario. But I could also make a counter argument, and I could say this. If one of those two guys gets injured, you should just tank as hard as possible again, and then get Jaren Jackson Jr., a young guard or a young wing that you can start trying to piece together your core going forward. Because when I look at that roster in terms of where it stands right now, I don't really see a playoff team here in the Marc Gasol era for the next year, 2, 3 years. I just don't think they have enough talent. And so I would be trying to sort of ease into like a soft reloading type scenario where you're kind of able to pivot if one of your main guys gets injured.
So I want to go ahead now and jump and talk a little bit about this Minnesota situation. Jimmy Butler, Andrew Wiggins, Karl Anthony Towns, et cetera, et cetera. Can the Timberwolves figure out a way to right their overall ship, their locker room, and their chemistry, which I think is probably going to be a hard no in general. But as a result of that, if they do finally move on from Jimmy Butler, where do you stand with Andrew Wiggins? I mean, his perception around the league is one that, again, all the gifts in the world, but just doesn't work. Maybe doesn't work hard enough. Maybe he doesn't love the game, et cetera, and just doesn't have the motor for it. Where do you see happening in Minnesota with Andrew Wiggins and kind of even that whole Jimmy Butler situation?
It's a really interesting situation because I thought Jimmy was right on the facts in terms of what his arguments were, but he was completely wrong in the delivery and the timing. And you don't usually see that when you usually see like a locker room blow up. It's just two sides that are just kind of irreconcilable and they don't see eye to eye and they just kind of hate each other. And I don't really get the sense that that's what was underlying the tension there in Minnesota. It didn't seem like you know the personalities were just like never going to be able to mesh. I think it was two different styles, right? And Jimmy's looking at Wiggins and saying what you just said, which is why doesn't he live up to his amazing potential? Why doesn't he play hard night to night? Why doesn't he make any impact on the defensive end? And he's looking at Towns and thinking, this guy needs to be a little tougher down low. Like if he's going to be an All NBA level center, he needs to be more commanding. And I tend to agree with Jimmy on all of those assessments. But the thing is, if you're the team leader, you can't be dropping those knowledge bombs and requesting a trade like 1 week before the season starts. That's just not how it works. And so I thought it was very unfortunate. I think he bears a ton of responsibility for how that thing went. And I think we should actually give credit for Towns and Wiggins both being fairly professional throughout that. They might have actually been intimidated into silence, but if they had wanted to make that worse, they definitely could have made that situation worse, right? And so I think, going forward, Jimmy's going to be there for at least a couple of months. We saw last year that he's a good enough player to keep them above 500, basically by himself, just kind of dragging them to victories. And I think for Minnesota, especially Thibodeau, the temptation to just, settle for that and hang on for dear life and hope that you can kind of change Jimmy's mind next summer is going to be overwhelming. And they're going to try hard to not deal him. And I think this is where ownership in the front office, it'd be nice if the owner knew what he was doing. And in Minnesota, he doesn't, he just has no clue. But, a real competent owner would have taken control of the situation a long time ago, found a way to deal with Jimmy before this all blew up and then just move forward. But I think, in terms of redeeming Wiggins, that's got to come from him. He's been called out publicly by his teammates and by opponents. Nobody's afraid of him. I think the sheen from being the number one pick has worn off. And at this point, it's about going out there and producing. And I was a big time Wiggins fan before the draft. I saw all the athletic potential that everybody else did. And I've been very disappointed in how he's been able to turn that into, game changing NBA level play. He just hasn't really done it.
Before we move on, Ben, I just want to add something to what you just said. I think that when I look at Wiggins and my perspective of hoops redemption, to me, it's a whole attitude adjustment with him. Like we need to dump him in the WWE attitude era to get anything out of this kid, because his whole demeanor and his whole approach to me is unfortunately a representation of someone that's just soft. I mean, he's basically letting the other guys punk him. And for someone to have the kind of athleticism, the ability, and all of the hype and the momentum that was emanating from him coming out of Kansas, it's just remarkable to me of how subdued he seems to be. Like there is just no sense of urgency, not just in his game, but in his approach. And I felt a lot of that was muted out by what happened to him in Cleveland and the situation that happened with LeBron James. Now, am I off in that frame of mind? Because you would think with someone with his attributes and his ability, given the landscape of where most of these other guys are in the NBA, there would be a little bit more attitude from this kid about him wanting to be as great as everyone perceived him to be.
I'm not sure I would blame like the Cleveland scenario, but what I would say is when he was in high school, he was so talented that I thought it was a really smart decision for him to reclassify, because I was always of the opinion like, look, going to college is such a waste of time. You should just try to get through there if you're an elite player as quickly as possible and get into the NBA. And so when he was in high school, he basically skipped a year, reclassified so he could get to the NBA more quickly. I thought that was a great move from him. In hindsight, I'm not sure that's true. I think that he had some growing up to do and some maturing. And I think it kind of put him into a position where once he skipped a grade and was still the number one pick, it's kind of easy to be coddled in that situation. It's easy to rest on your laurels. It's easy to think that your talent will get you through everything. And I talked to him, a summer or two ago before they got that extension, and I was in Vegas, and I asked him like, do you think you're worth a max contract? And he told me straight to my face, not a penny less. Basically, there's no negotiation. Just give it to me. And it was there's a real debate whether he should have been a max guy at that point. And what did the Timberwolves do? They gave it to him. They didn't even think twice about it, really. I mean, they dragged their feet a little bit, but they ultimately gave him the full max. And that just sort of rewards, the tendencies that you're describing, right? The coasting, maybe the lack of heart, the lack of desire. And so I think he's kind of been in a situation where he's been kind of walking this golden brick road for so long since his high school days that he's never really been forced to look in the mirror and challenge himself. And I'm just worried that the light bulb, if it ever does go on, it's going to go on too late. And so when we're talking about guys who can be redeemed, that's why I keep saying, like, I'm not sure if he can be, but if he's going to be, it's coming from within. It's not going to come from people outside yelling at him, because it's shown for the last 2 years with Jimmy Butler that approach will not work.
So you talk about a guy kind of maybe stuck in their own ways, or maybe in their own way. Talk about Carmelo Anthony. You and Andrew on the Open Floor podcast, you guys have some great conversations and going back and forth and well documented about Melo not necessarily working out in OKC and kind of just blew that whole situation up. He's now potentially, whether that be begrudgingly or not, accepting a role. We find out today that James Ennis is going to be out maybe a couple games now, and they still don't want to move Melo into the starting lineup. Do you think there's any redeeming quality for Carmelo Anthony on the Houston Rockets, playing with two super elite playmakers in Chris Paul and James Harden? Can he be a guy, like many others that we've talked about, if he gets out of his own way, can he be a guy that can have some redemption here and help the Houston Rockets and not be such a negative that he was in OKC?
I'd love to believe, but I don't really. And I'll say this, like, I am as nostalgic as just about anybody. I mean, I love the old Sports Illustrated magazines. I still keep them from the 90s. I still pretend that Space Jam was a good movie. I still collect Michael Jordan sneakers. I do all that stuff. So I understand living in the past, but a lot of Melo's fans are living in the past. And I know it hurts for them to hear that, but 2008 Melo has been gone for a long, long, long time. And I don't think it really matters where you put him. He's still fundamentally the same guy. And how many players do we see at his age, 30 plus, if they're terrible defenders their whole career, how many guys get better? It hardly ever happens. And there's just basically no scenario where Melo's going to be able to play good enough defense in the playoffs to stay on the court against a really good team. I mean, he got completely exposed by the Utah Jazz in the first round, last year, and Golden State will pick on him mercilessly if they get a chance to go at him. I think a team like Denver would really be able to pick on him as well. You can go right down the list of these Western Conference, contenders who would be able to sort of exploit him, and so he may find more efficient opportunities because of the Chris Paul factor, like you're mentioning, and he's going to give you some nights where he scores 20 and looks like the old guy, but just night to night defensively, he can't do it. And I also don't think, just getting up and down the court and moving off the ball and doing the little things, like the kinds of stuff that Houston really needs, the kind of stuff that PJ Tucker and Trevor Ariza really excelled at last season for them, Melo just doesn't check those boxes. And so I guess I always kind of questioned, like, how great of it was a fit was Melo going there for Houston. I could see why it would be enticing to Carmelo, but what's Houston getting out of this? And ultimately, I'm not sure what they are. And I think it was very smart for them to move him to a bench role. I think that's going to be the only way they're going to get anything out of Carmelo this season.
So we know we're short on time, so we're going to run through some quick hitters here for you. You can kind of give a yay or nay, or maybe a quick take on these, but I want to run through three names for you real quickly here: Serge Ibaka, Avery Bradley, and we're going to go with Reggie Jackson from the Detroit Pistons. Those three guys, where you kind of see their ceilings this season.
I'm thumbs up on all three of those guys as being redemption candidates just because of the injuries factor, right? Or maybe being limited by stuff. It didn't seem like Ibaka was quite right last year. Avery Bradley is a classic buy low candidate where he's a solid player for 8 years. He has one terrible year, and then everybody runs away from him. I mean, he could have a bounce back year for sure. And he's got a pretty good fit there with the Clippers. I mean, that's a nice try hard team. They're good, wholesome, family fun. And he fits that mold pretty well. And then Reggie Jackson, look, he's another guy like Miles Turner a little bit where he teases you, right? But Reggie Jackson at his best can lead a winning team. Now, how often is he able to stay there, and how long can he stay healthy for? And will he be able to have his personality mesh with guys like Blake Griffin or Andre Drummond? Those are big time open questions. But to me, I think Detroit's got a chance to make the playoffs this season, and that's not saying a ton in the Eastern Conference, but if they do make the playoffs, it will because Reggie Jackson's redemption will be the leading reason why.
Finally, man, I got to throw this one out to you just for kicks and giggles, Ben. The whole Cleveland Cavalier roster. Is there any level of hoops redemption for these guys? I think the only reason why I bring these guys up is because if I feel bad for them on one end because LeBron James left them, but I also feel like, man, they're going to have to explain themselves if this becomes the worst basketball team all over. If you're a J.R. Smith, if you're a Rodney Hood, if you're a Kevin Love, like I almost feel like he left those guys out there in the killing fields, given what's going to happen for them this season.
Yeah, I mean, I think take that roster and throw it in the river and light the river on fire. They've got some experience with that in Cleveland. They got burning rivers every once in a while.
That's not hoops redemption, Ben. That's Red Dead redemption, man. Come on.
Okay, yeah, you're ready. Well said. Yeah, I'm burying them again. No, I think certain guys are going to be okay. Kevin Love definitely still has trade value around the league. Don't write him off, but. I don't know if you guys saw Trae Young versus Colin Sexton the other night, but stop the fight, like that got so ugly. Like just do a head-to-head stats between those two guys in that game, and I was just shaking my head like, oh my God, I feel so bad for this kid. And the rest of that roster we knew was seriously flawed. I mean, there's not a lot of talent otherwise. J.R. Smith has kind of been coasting here for the last couple of years. Rodney Hood, really needs to pull himself together, and I'm not sure he's ever going to be the type of player we all expected a couple of years ago. And the rest is just kind of like cute stories like a Chetty Osman, and that's really about it. So, to me, the best thing that can happen to Cleveland is that they get a top 5 pick this year. I mean, their hopes of chasing a playoff spot, I never saw that for them this season, even if Kevin Love really, blew up. And I think that, their ugly start to the year is basically their best case scenario. They just need to get a more talent influx. They got Kyrie with that number 1 pick a few years ago to kind of rebuild in the first post LeBron era. And that's the type of player that they really need to find as they go forward.
He is the man. He does it all. He's been covering the NBA for quite a bit of time. Don't get it twisted. He doesn't always come with a shovel and a pickaxe, but he'll give you the goods whenever you ask him to. It is Ben Golliver. He writes for Sports Illustrated. Ben, we thank you so much for hopping on board with us and giving our people a little something to think about with our segment of Hoops Redemption.
Hey, it's my pleasure. Great chat, guys. I'm surprised nobody threw Lonzo Ball out there. That's one guy I want to see redeemed, and hopefully it will come a little bit here this season, but we'll see going forward. Thanks for having me. We'll talk soon.
All right, sounds great. You're tuned to The Baseline. Cal Lee, Warren Shaw discussing the hot button topics of the NBA, and this was The Breakdown.
Coast to coast. Coast to coast.
Time to go coast to coast, discussing the news in the association. You ready to rock and roll, Mr. Shaw?
Absolutely, man. Let's ride.
It's been a while since we did one of these, man. I'm a little rusty, so bear with me here. All right, out in Chicago, Chris Dunn, he's out 4 to 6 weeks with an MCL sprain. Bad luck for Dunn. He may actually be done.
Chicago, just a brutal start to the year. Lauri Markkanen is out. They got Denzel Valentine. He's out. Now Chris Dunn plays 1 game, and he's out as well, too. So Chicago wanted to prove some of the naysayers wrong, but not getting off to a great start with all these injuries, homie.
All right, out in Denver, Will Barton, he got that re-up with Denver, but he's going to have to sit down and count cash and not play basketball. He's going to be out until December. How big of a blow is that for the Denver Nuggets?
Well, luckily for the Nugs, man, they're pretty talented offensively, specifically. And Barton, while a very good player, they'll be able to replace his offense pretty easily. And he's not a great defender. I mean, he has athletic ability and he can play pass lanes against some steals. I think they'll be able to cover up with that with Gary Harris and Jamal Murray being able to do their part, so to speak. They still have IT on the men as well, too. But Denver is looking pretty solid to start the year.
We talked about how the Denver Nuggets are a team with depth. They may lose Will Barton, but they certainly have enough players to at least keep up this really good start or beginning start to the season. out in Atlanta. John Collins, he's going to be out for a little bit longer than expected. They have not specified a timeline, but what we do know is that he's still weeks away from him seeing basketball activities. How big of a blow is that for Collins and the Atlanta Hawks?
Man, this is the triage unit of the coast to coast here, man. Collins, not being reevaluated until like November 4th. I think they said it's only supposed to miss the first week of the season. Now, going to be out at least the first, 3 weeks, almost a month. Atlanta wants to get that duo going, although Collins is not really going to help them in the win column, so to speak, and try to, and he wouldn't ruin their lottery chances. But you just want to get them out there and see how he can play alongside Trae Young and such. And I think that's what Atlanta fans are really missing, and more so than what Lloyd Porce wants to see from his young duo.
And damn, man, I mean, we spent all that time talking about how that combination with Alex Len and Trae Young was supposed to be the X factor for the Atlanta Hawks.
Well, you know.
All right. Out in Golden State, the word is DeMarcus Cousins has been given the green light, and he's starting to up his basketball activity. So you know what that means to the rest of the NBA. Damn.
Oh, brother, it's wild. So yeah, Cuzzo really shattering projections, so to speak, and coming back hella early. And a shout out to our boy Mo as well too, man. I said, this is the 1 year in fantasy I decided not to draft any injured players. Like, I'm not doing it. No guys injured. I'm just gonna go with the healthy guys. Usually I take a chance on a guy like Cousins, and then they don't come back till January. Now it looks like Cousins may be back, in the next couple weeks or so. Go figure, man. But shouts to the Golden State Warriors. Can't wait to see what they look like with DMC on the floor.
And one other thing, man, you have to be really impressed because DeMarcus Cousins could have basically kind of rested on his laurels. He's only been given the minimum contract, so it ain't like the Warriors are trying to rush him back. I think this is all DeMarcus Cousins. I think that especially, and we've seen how it is, man. Golden State, Phoenix Suns, they have an excellent staff that revitalizes careers for players who have suffered significant knee and leg injuries. If this is what we're talking about with DeMarcus Cousins, I'm talking about, man, revenge ain't gonna be the word for what he might do to the NBA when he sets foot on that basketball court. Out in Miami, the Heat are talking about ending their pursuit of Butler. So the Butler did it, right?
And Butler's not doing nothing. At least not for the Miami Heat.
You on that one, man. You had no words for that one.
Not doing nothing right now for the Miami Heat, as Minnesota, as we talked about a little bit earlier in the show, seems like they're going to hold on to Jimmy B and try to figure it out. Maybe something shakes loose around the trade deadline, or maybe if Miami goes into a swan dive, maybe they try to sweeten up their deal a little bit off to Minnesota to try to get it done sooner. But I just feel like two sides just not able to come together. Minnesota's asking price is just astronomical. Miami not willing to give, and not be able to really make contracts match. Try to get a third team involved. All of that has gone to the wayside right now. So both teams will just kind of stand pat and see where things go from here.
All right. And finally, Shaw, I felt the need that we had to end our coast to coast segment properly. The whole Rondo and Spitgate. Rondo finally chimes in and weighs in on what happened and his perspective on it. Somehow, in the midst of him and his explanation, he found it suitable to make sure that he let people know that Chris Paul is just a horrible teammate. and while he denies that he spat at Chris Paul, I just find it remarkable that, indicative of a person that you just dislike, you got to make sure that everybody knows that they're just really a horrible human being that you never want to play with them.
Yeah, Rondo is a wild dude. I mean, it really is. Because I think much of the same has been said about Rondo over the course of his career. And someone thinks that he's been involved with interesting tweet in response to Rondo from Daryl Morey, president general manager of the Houston Rockets. He puts out just a picture of a pot and a kettle. Both of those, that pot and kettle, happen to be black. Insert your pun there. I think you know where we're going with it. So I think it's very interesting. But I will say this, not in defense of Rondo. I think Chris Paul has a little bit of undeserved shine in terms of that good guy image. He's got the State Farm commercials and all of that. Chris Paul is edgy, bro, and he's got a little bit of a villain in him. And I think we've seen that. We've heard that around the league as well too. So while Rondo may not be the best person to be calling it out, I don't think he's completely justified or unjustified in saying that Chris Paul isn't actually the angel that many make him out to be.
But this is great for the NBA, though. I'd never encourage anybody to spit on another player, but I'm gonna tell you this right now, man. This kind of vitriol, you can ask for that, man. I feel, man. Listen, I feel like I'm ready to kick my feet up, man, and just ready to watch some good NBA basketball when the Lakers and the Rockets, saying take the gloves off one more time. I think it's going to be even better the second time around. This has been an awesome, awesome show, especially having our special guest, Ben Golliver, jumping on board with us, man. Great topic of conversation. A lot of guys, man, this could be a year for them where they can redeem or they may run out of steam. But either way we look at it, man, there's some players that we definitely going to be watching for through the course of this season to see if they're going to break themselves out of that hole that they find that they've dug themselves in, or maybe that Ben dug them in.
Yeah, Ben put some bodies in the grave, man. He got to count on here.
We have to bring him on at the end of the season, man. When we start knocking those
playoff
teams, yeah, man, we got to body them teams up, man. He seems to do it real well. We may have to call him the cleaner. So
yeah, man, he wasn't having it. So shouts to Ben Golliver, Sports Illustrated, and shouts to even his partner Andrew Sharp on the Open Floor podcast. They do a great job over on their network. We were lucky and fortunate to have him part of our show today, man. So we're gonna keep giving him the butt of good, as you like to say, my dude. I think it was a fun show, and as always, I hope our fans and listeners enjoyed it as well.
Most definitely. Once again, we'd like to thank our man Ben Golliver for jumping on board with you. If you want to catch him and any of the recent articles that he drops for SI, you can catch him on Twitter at Ben Golliver. For the Baseline, Cal Lee, Warren Shaw, we appreciate you guys, each and every single one of you, and we'll catch up with you next time.